we're talking about being locked out. So an extension of Craig's talk, why we can't buy what you're selling, tips and tactics for inclusive design. And what we're trying to do as well in this conference is to really give an opportunity for people, the voices of experience, to be able to share what they've been through, how they experience buying products and services. Oftentimes we don't connect to the individual. We connect maybe, or we're trying to use the business case for accessibility by using statistics rather than using rather than leading with empathy and thinking about individuals specifically. When we do think about individuals, maybe we are better versed to create more inclusive products. So Brian, we have you as well. Can you hear me? Your mic is turned off, Brian.
I can indeed hear you. Yeah, I can indeed.
Super. Brian, your camera is also off. That's totally fine if you prefer to have that off.
Sorry, my bandwidth is just low, so I just turned it off. Sorry about that.
No. If you prefer to keep it off, that's all right. But if you want to give us an introduction to yourself for our attendees, that would be super.
Sure. So I'm Brian. I'm a test lead. I'm a screen reader user for lots and lots and lots of years. So I always kind of come to the table to talk about compliance and I guess usability as well.
Great. So really good to have you, Brian. And Clive, let's go to you. Let us know something about you, your work, and why do you care about accessibility?
Oh, thank you. Well, it's great to be here. My name's Clive. I'm passionate about website accessibility. I've been since 2006 when I co-founded Access by Design. We're an accessible web design agency, and our mission has always been to demonstrate that accessibility and design can actually coexist in the same space. I was very fortunate enough to give a TED talk on this a couple of years ago, and I work with an amazing team of disabled people as we help other people with their digital accessibility. It matters to me because I was a passenger in a car crash in '89. It left us all with life-changing injuries. Seeing firsthand the issues faced by disabled people meant that we all wanted to do something to change that. When we started Access by Design 18 years ago, we realised that the digital space was just as inaccessible as the physical space was back then. Change since then, in the last 18 years, has unfortunately been pretty slow.
Yeah, absolutely. Craig, we might just take another brief introduction from yourself, just as new people have joined since your talk.
Yeah, I can do. So I'm Craig. I'm the founder of Different Breed. We're a disabled-led tech for good organisation that operates by building solutions as our form of advocacy in the event space. So, yeah, and I stammer and I use a method of real-time word swapping to talk. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, and Craig, well, he mentioned in his last, he did a talk at 2:00, and everything is recorded and everything will be shared afterwards. And I really recommend looking back at Craig's talk when he's showing the software platform he's built for Different Breed to create accessible ticketing for events. And I really liked in that you said not only do you stammer, but you're also Scottish. So let's see how that goes for a number of people. There are captions, but unfortunately, sign language interpreters cancelled on us today. So my apologies on that for newcomers. So like you said, Brian, you mentioned you're a screen reader user. Craig mentioned that you stammer, and Clive that you and then individuals around you kind of acquired disabilities, back in the 80s. So all of you guys have lived experience individually and then very close to you as well. Going back a long time, if we think about it in terms of the digital world, and I'm going to start with probably the if we could crack this question, we'd all be millionaires. We wouldn't be really here. It's that, if 1 in 5 people have a disability, then why is 95% of the internet or the online world not accessible to them? And it's kind of a head scratcher, really. And Brian, I don't know if you might have some thoughts on that. Why is it still so inaccessible?
I think it's a big lack of awareness, to be honest with you. That's the first thing I would say. Most people, when I talk about accessibility to, a lot of people haven't experienced it before. Thankfully, it's higher up on the radar now than it once was. It's getting more coverage, but I still think it's that lack of awareness. Most people don't know how a screen reader user reads content, navigates content, and interacts with the content on their screen to do very basic things, to fill in a form, for example, to read a web page. And we can talk about more complex things too, like images on web pages as well. And I think it's that lack of awareness around how things can be made accessible in a simple way, and by getting a lot of quick wins and the impact that that's going to have. I think that's where it starts.
Yeah, I think awareness, and I just want, so during this discussion, I'll also be taking questions from the chat. And I think that this is relevant right now because I mentioned that 95% or it's more. And Lawrence asked, does anyone know where the statistics on internet inaccessibility come from? Off the top of my head, I can't remember. Was it AbilityNet? Do you guys know that there's been, I think, Clive, you know?
It's the WHO.
Oh, it's the WHO. Okay,
Yeah.
well, let us throughout this talk.
I'm so sorry. There's two things to say. The WHO is in terms of the number of people who are disabled, but the 95% comes from WebAIM, which does a survey every year of the top 1 million websites. When I did my TED talk, it was 96.1% of websites were not accessible. Failed the basics, I mean. Now I think 2 years on it's something like 95.4. So it's not exactly dropped by a huge amount.
Yeah, so actually I've just found it there. So it's WebAIM, and I'll share it in the chat.
Yeah.
Their 2024 report. Oh, somebody already did it. Thank you. You beat me to it, Stacey. So yeah, dropping, but marginally. And I think that Brian's point about awareness is key. Any additional thoughts on for you, Craig?
Yeah, like I think generally Brian has answered that kind of perfectly. I think it just comes back to, like, as kind of humans, we expect other people to interact with the world the kind of same way we do. So we don't naturally ask questions or think about how other situations could be. So I think it kind of comes down to the thought of that, like, accessibility sometimes isn't kind of prioritized or thought about within organizations because there's not someone who is disabled in the room at that kind of point in time. And I think it also comes down into something around kind of like planning websites and like planning different kinds of digital products when we essentially map out things like user personas and user stories. It comes into being that everybody usually fits into one single box. So they are like Finance Freddy, Coffee Chris, and things like that. And disabilities is one of those areas where you can't really put it in a single persona. It has to be multiple personas. And I think that's where a lot of people maybe look at that as quite a complex requirement. So it's pushed to a phase 2, which then usually never gets delivered. And that's usually what I've found through working at kind of digital agencies, is that there's a lack of available kind of data points and analytics around accessibility inside of our own experiences. So usually people don't have data to back up arguments, and then other things get prioritized, which is unfortunate, but that's what I've seen across my kind of career.
Yeah, that data deficit, let's say, and that's something that I think is huge. And if people have, I'd like to know maybe in the chat if everybody that has attended today obviously has an interest in accessibility. It doesn't mean that your organization is working towards it. So it'd be interesting to know, where is it on the agenda for your companies in terms of making digital experiences more more accessible. And so, Clive, the same question to you, and if you see that there's you know, an extension of that, is it around the data, that there's the multiple personas? How easy is it, or how difficult is it for companies to comprehend all of the things they need to account for?
I think where I would start is, as everyone else has said, is it starts with people just not getting it. And if the accident hadn't have happened, we would have been a web design agency like anybody else, and we would have maybe heard of accessibility but not really get it, not really get why it's important. Which is why I don't tend to criticize people. I used to be very vocal, but I kind of, because we've got lived experience, that's why we get it. Almost everybody I meet in the accessibility world has either got a personal experience or a relationship or knows somebody who is affected by this. So therefore, because if somebody hasn't got their personal connection, then you have to start somewhere else. And that's why you start the dialogue by getting them over that basic hurdle of why it's important. I'm not certainly blowing my own trumpet at all. The TED Talk was just designed for people. I met somebody who was into disability, into inclusion. That was her job in her workplace, that employed about 30 plus people. And we were having a chat. She heard me talking about accessibility and about blind people and screen readers. And she said to me, in really nice person, but she said, I don't get it. You're talking about blind people using the internet. How can they? They can't see the screen. And that actually became the title of my TED Talk, because it wasn't she was being offensive, she was just didn't get it. And that's, I think, if you can go back to those first principles and helping people to get it, other things will flow from that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's the awareness piece. Brian, he said he had poor internet, so I think he has lost his connection. That awareness piece, and we don't know what we don't know. And unless you've seen somebody with using a screen reader, using the internet, you think that just doesn't happen. And so when we are removed from a personal experience, when we're removed from having a family member or a friend, using that experience, then what we need to rely on maybe is those data points, which are often lacking. And Clive, also, you're on the board now of a new startup called Bankability, who are trying to revolutionize the banking space in a similar way, doing what Different Breed is doing for event ticketing with the financial services. And financial services are one industry, one sector, I suppose, that can cause difficulty and complexity for people with accessibility needs. In your own experience, banking can be one, or other ones. Craig, you can't mention ticketing now that we've talked about ticketing a bit, but what other experiences in trying to purchase a product or service fills you with dread and means that you can't get it, or you just walk away from it? Craig?
Well, actually, there's a couple of points I'd say there. Firstly, about data points, it is a chicken and it's impossible. It's not possible to solve, because if disabled people can't use a website, they don't use it, they just go. So therefore, you can't measure how many disabled people are not using your website, because they just don't go. So it's literally, that's why you come back to basic analogies. If you make a door wider for a wheelchair, it's wider for somebody with a pram, it's wider for somebody with bags of shopping. It's that conceptual thing, and then the rest follows. But I got, in terms of actual real life example, we were testing a charity page. They had a donation page, and it connected via the payment was through one of the biggest, world's biggest providers, and she was entering her credit card details. Now this payment page works pretty well with screen readers, so I thought, oh, this is going to be good. When it came to Iona, who's got a hand disability, so she uses dictation software rather than a screen reader, this particular payment provider had this helpful option that remembered your card details from previous websites, and which would make it easier for you to put them in. Unfortunately, the JavaScript that it was loading that allowed this facility was literally fighting with her dictation software. And when it came to her entering her credit card details in that field, you literally saw it fighting against each other, and she wasn't unable to enter anything. So that is such a basic example about a website that was tested for people who use screen readers, but it wasn't tested for people who might have other accessibility needs. So that, and I mean, that comes to mind because it was a recent example, but you come across it all the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Craig?
Yeah, I think in terms of the experiences that that are difficult accessing. So for me, with a stammer, GP appointments is probably the most kind of hardest one, and the fact that you have to phone for a GP appointment. I can't do phone calls with a stammer, so you can no longer book GP appointments in person. You can't book them in advance; they have to be booked in the morning. So that's incredibly difficult, and I think that on like a similar approach is when you have services like insurance companies that force you to phone them to cancel or renew. And I think that's kind of like a bit of a great example of where companies have prioritized, like their commercial benefit over customer convenience, and that's locking people out in a sense. So I would say that they're kind of two of the biggest blockers in my life is general, just like kind of like interacting with kind of like GP and doctor services, and even just anything and what requires a phone call towards it. So that could be insurance, it could be phoning a bank for help, or even communicating with a bank in person can be tough as well. So yeah, there's things like that. There is a lot of areas in terms of that.
Yeah, insurance comes to mind because I just got the renewal quote for my car, which is extortionate. And the only way to get around that and to, fight them down is with a phone call. And so you're at a loss if a phone call is something that is, something that you struggle with. Well, then you're going to pay extortionate fees for all of your renewals, for your insurance, for anything. I'm just forgetful and I forget to do it. But it feels like they put in a number of barriers to make it harder for you to be able to talk to them or engage with them. And a number of things that are, well, a huge trend at the moment, is the use of AI agents, maybe saving on human capital in that they don't have to pay individuals to work per hour, but they could have an AI agent for 24/7. There can be maybe some good things. There could be maybe some bad things about the use of AI. But some companies I have seen that they're maybe trying to bring in a speech or a dictation agent for something like that in insurance, for example. Would that be, obviously again with a stammer, that could be the AI has to work really, really well.
Yeah. Like I generally think with like a lot of like dictation software and like AI and things like that, I think number one, like AI isn't being designed for disabled individuals first. It's being designed to automate the general kind of like public usage through services. So what you essentially end up finding is anything and what a disabled individual needs to do is usually pushed to a phone line. And that's even through AI software. It just defaults you to, we can't currently do this online, please phone us type thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that when it comes to even dictation software or even automated answering services, when you stammer, those services don't have a concept of when you've stopped speaking or when you're blocked on speech, which ends up being that you are asked to, say, read out a card number, which can be incredibly difficult depending on what numbers are on the card based on what kind of words block you, or letters or like vowels block you type thing. Like I struggle with the letter A as an example, and sometimes when it comes to reading out an address or it comes to reading out card numbers, etc., you can get blocked, and then it just goes into a loop of where it fails 5 times and then puts you through to speak to someone. But it would be a lot more convenient if you could just go, I don't want to use this, I want to speak to someone. because I can't successfully get through that journey. So I think that there's benefits being brought into using AI and things like that, but I think the majority of the benefits haven't been thought about from a disabled standpoint. They've been thought about from a convenience, from a kind of general user point of view instead, is what I think is happening.
It definitely. Any thoughts on that, Clive, and seeing the rise of AI and
I have, I think we all have different views on how effective AI can be. For me personally, it is effective because when I'm doing my live audits with my team, it's the transcription or the note taking is very useful, because when you're doing a live audit with my guys, they're sharing my screen with it, it becomes quite intense, and actually it has some really good functionality. But just what was Craig was talking about, the fact that, you know, if everything is, you know, just call us, and that is an issue. When I write accessibility statements, one of the things that I always suggest is including there is that you include a text to speech option or a WhatsApp or another way that people can contact you, because accessibility fundamentally is some providing an alternative if it's not possible for somebody to use a facility. Not every lift has got every set of stairs has got a lift next to it. Yeah, simple examples like that. So therefore, if you've got a text messaging service as an alternative for people who can't speak or have difficulty with it, that is an alternative that you're offering. It's a lot of these things isn't that difficult. It just requires thinking outside the box. And the difficulty is, the larger the corporation, the more they've got invested in these huge infrastructure. And the idea of something simple like, you know, adding in a chat facility or a text messaging chat, whatever, takes years to get through layers of board meetings and decision making before it actually, you know, and that, not being anti-corporate here, but that is one of the difficulties, is that change is unbelievably slow. I chat to a lot of people who are so passionate about accessibility. They work in corporations and they really want to see change, but they, unfortunately, they have to spend all their time convincing all the people around them and all the people in the multi layers of management above them how important it is. And that is always the problem, which is why I come back to your initial question about why the 95% of websites don't even meet the basics, is because the stakeholders are the ones who don't get it. And that's really, everything else will flow from it if you can get to them.
And that's why I think that somebody's question, Lauren's like, I want to use these stats in my communications with my own team. And maybe, so if the attendees, you can share like how much up the agenda of the C-suite, of the people at the top, the stakeholders with the purse strings, are they invested? Are they aware? Do they have the mindset shift? Because when we talk about disability inclusion, when we talk about accessibility, the first place that people go to is, well, first of all, it might be a nice to have, but for my conversation with some large corporates as well, they think, oh, we don't have any disabled customers. And that's, and really, I think that comes back to the data, but it also comes back to it being digital. When we talk about the digital world is so different to the physical, that if I'm a shopkeeper and I see 10 people go by my shop today, and I see that 2 couldn't come in because they had mobility aids, and I have steps they couldn't get up, I can see that I lost 20% of my customers today. And I might make that change because I see it physically. But in the digital world, we don't see it. And so there's a much greater disconnect between what you're doing, what's happening, and how it's impacting on people. And how can we solve for that? Because I gave a talk before, and I just started it with, who wants 20% more customers? You know, and well, of course, you know, we want more. Who wants more customers? And if the question is, do you want more customers? They'll say yes. If the question is, do you want your product to be accessible? Well, they say, well, why does it need to be? well, it's back to the same thing. It's more customers, it's better user experience. It's better brand loyalty, better brand trust. But unless we can connect those things together, and again, I'm interested from the people in the chat, what data points or what language and what information do we need to be using to get it into the minds and alter the mindset of people at the top? What we could see there with, say, looking at the Evinced product, what Evinced does is it puts accessibility into the building blocks at the very beginning. Starts with the designers, it moves to the engineers, and just by default, you have accessibility in your processes, in your workflows. Even if you're not really thinking about it, that's just becomes part of your workflow, and so I think maybe it's about that mindset shift there as well. And one thing that might be helping companies to move in mindset is the oncoming EU Accessibility Act coming into force in June 2025. Clive, what do you think? Like you said, you've been working in accessibility for a good number of years. Is this now a turning point that will start to shift people's attitudes and practices?
Well, I hope it will be. I keep looking for that turning point, and you keep thinking something's going to change. I think this will, and the reason why is because it's going to have teeth. In the same way that, and I am really excited about it, because it doesn't just apply to digital accessibility, it applies to accessibility in terms of employment, in terms of employee welfare, in terms of workspaces. It affects so many things. And I think it's fantastic, because what it will mean is that although when data protection came out and data protection legislation came out from the EU a few years ago, although it was concerned primarily with Europe initially, it's affected everybody, and every country in the world has got data protection policies and law because of that. And this is where this is going to go. It's actually been enacted and has been around for a few years now. It's been only applying to the public sector within the UK, within the EU. Then it will roll out across everywhere. And I think it's going to be great, because when you start seeing big companies find 6-7 figures for having poor accessibility, people will get it. They're not all, it won't get it immediately. It will still be a slow take up. I don't think suddenly the world is going to be full of everybody desperate to get improve their accessibility. But I think over the next few years, when people see people being hit on the bottom line, I'm sorry to be cynical, but when it affects somebody's bottom line at a big level, people will take it seriously and they'll want to do it. So I am incredibly positive about it.
Mm-hmm. Craig?
Yeah, I'm the exact same. I think it's going to be great. I think it's definitely going to bring accessibility back into the spotlight at a lot of corporations, including very big corporations. I think from that is going to start to change the procurement process on the software as well, and the fact that a lot of larger companies are going to be putting accessibility high up in their requirements lists when they go for a new website build, when they look at new alternative software, because it's now becoming more of a kind of effectively has teeth, and it's a kind of a calm compliance piece. And I think that's going to naturally bubble down into a bit of an ecosystem of where people are going to want to make their products more accessible, because it gives them an edge over their competitors, and it also allows them to win larger work based off of that kind of basis. I guess the kind of only thing I would say from my side, especially from working with events organizations, is that there's going to be a double-edged sword here, of where the accessibility is going to become more of a pressing issue for them, more than it currently is. But we're also going to be seeing a lot of situations of where the agencies that pick up the work sell accessible solutions, but it goes back to the existing problem of misunderstanding accessible needs. So things will be sold as accessible, then they won't be accessible, and then there's going to be a culture shift in understanding and having to understand what accessibility is, which I think is what we've been missing for the kind of past while, in terms of actually having that repercussion come out of it when you sell something as accessible when it's not, which I think is going to make a real change as well. So that's my kind of thought on that. I think it will bring about change. It's going to take a while, but I think now that it essentially does have teeth in it, that yes, it will bring about change in a positive manner.
Yeah, well, we certainly hope so. And I wonder if some people in the chat let us know, is the EU Act something that your company is talking about, thinking about? It is coming into legislation in June 2025. From a large corporation point of view, that's not a lot of time to change practices. You are, there might be some people saying that we're in the UK, we're no longer in the EU now, so do we have to care? Do companies in the UK still have to care, Clive?
Okay, well, if you have any kind of gateway into Europe, then you do have to care, because you will come under it in the same way that large American corporations, social media corporations, have been fined tens of millions of dollars for the way that they don't look after people's personal data very well. It's exactly that same kind of teeth. Whether, to be honest, I think it is something that is you're going to see the world jump on board, even if you don't have a direct in to Europe. If any of your customers do, or if any of your potential customers do, they're going to want to see that if you're supplying to them, that you're able to meet that. It's something that's just going to become unstoppable. Maybe that's being slightly optimistic, but I think it will be the game changer. I do find it nuts, though. The Disability Discrimination Act came out 25 years ago. Sorry, the WCAG first set of guidelines came out 25 years ago, and we're still on this. Only 5% of websites pass the basics. I keep thinking, what's it going to take? And hopefully this will be it.
It can be, and I think different countries are implementing different kind of I don't know what the word is, fines and things, regulations. In Ireland, there's the potential not only to be fined, but there's also potential jail time. Now, yeah, fines of 60,000 if your website isn't compatible. And in a sense, what it's doing is, there's a lot of good things it's doing because it's starting the conversation. And the two of you are in the UK, I'm in Ireland. A lot of people in the chat are, in the USA. I would say that Ireland is very far behind the UK and certainly the USA in terms of thinking about accessibility and digital accessibility. The most people that we talk to about this have never heard of it. And it's still just about color contrast or maybe alt text. Alt text is like the gateway. They're starting to get awareness of that. And I think that comes down to social media. So anywhere that you are directly connected to the audience, let's say, and you can see maybe people are commenting on things and starting to talk about alt text, then you're going to say, oh, maybe we can do that. And that's a low cost solution as well. The other thing is by saying, like, is there a little bit of fear mongering and say, if you don't do this, there'll be fines and jail time. And they don't do it and they don't go to jail because realistically, nobody in Ireland is going to put people in jail for having a website that is inaccessible. I hope not. Really what we need to do is implement change rather than put fear on people. I did see today that American Airlines were fined $50 million for mishandling of wheelchairs in transit. So, wow. Yeah, I just saw the headline. I haven't read the full article, so I hope I haven't misquoted on that. But there are companies getting fines, and it hasn't deterred them. And there are also companies selling, and one thing for us to raised the issue of as well is the companies selling things like the overlays or the magic fixes for accessibility, because that's the other thing. If you say you have 6 months to get accessible, and I Google how to be accessible, and I find the biggest companies with the biggest sponsored ads on Google, because I still use Google, selling me a solution that's going to fix my website in a matter of minutes with a few lines of code, why wouldn't I do that? So Craig, tell us, what do people need to be aware of with quick fixes and overlays?
I think that when it comes to quick fixes and overlays, from being a software engineer for most of my career, I know for a fact that they don't work and simply don't work. And one of the kind of best examples is I think there's currently lawsuits with a couple of them, particularly within the kind of blind community and the kind of US around that. Some of the accessibility plugins are actually making it harder to use the experiences than it was before, because they manipulate kind of DOM elements and different kinds of actual code level things on a page. I think in terms of the essentially tools, there is also an element of where there's a lot of kind of false advertisement when it comes to a lot of them. Essentially, they sell it up front as being a magic solution that fixes everything. And I think they're also going to be affected by the upcoming kind of legislation around that there has to be some kind of a responsibility put on these tools to actually communicate upfront that they aren't perfect, that they aren't a one size fits all. This will give you a bit of an idea, maybe fix some things, but fundamentally from an engineering point of view, unless you understand the actual basics and what make up a website, it's very, very difficult to actually find a tool that will make it like kind of proper semantic order and proper kind of tooling, because fundamentally we need to think about accessibility as part of the entire experience and not just a bolt on that we put on at the end to meet compliance. And so, yeah, so I think a lot of these kind of products that are put on are probably going to have a lot of spotlight initially, but then I think there's going to be a bit of backlash against them and a bit of kind of people refocusing on the fact that we do need to handle it properly and not look for quick fixes. But I do also think there is opportunity in this space, not from plugins, but from the actual website builders themselves, to make sure that they are producing things like accessible code, because not everyone can afford a web design agency or a website developer to build their own sites. So services like Squarespace and Wix and things like that, they are putting effort into being more accessibility compliant. And if we can fix it from a provider point of view, then it becomes a more of a kind of systematic change rather than a individual's kind of responsibility. Because I don't think it's realistic to expect a small farm shop in the middle of a town in the middle of nowhere to have to meet high to have to go off and hire a custom engineering team to go in and make their WordPress theme accessible. I think it should be on some of the actual larger platforms to lead by example and make those experiences accessible, so we can get a nice head start on it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe like you said, Clive, some of the larger payments systems maybe accounting for one disability but not looking for all. And we have Stacey there saying in the chat that she just wishes that more people understood the challenge that are faced, the scheduling of a doctor's appointment, paying a bill, ordering dinner online, showing the impact of navigating the inaccessible sites. And it's that disconnect between what we put out and what actually happens in real life. And Clive, with your agency, you demonstrate some videos of that as well with your users and testers.
Yeah, I think it's only when if you're watching a video and you actually see the issues as they're encountered that you get it. And it's like I said at the beginning, if there hadn't been the accident, we wouldn't be any more pro accessibility we wouldn't understand it. So that's why getting that first hurdle, and then when you filters down to the designers, I actually find designers and coders and engineers, once they start to get on it, they actually get really enthusiastic about it, because you are on a one-way street. It's the one of the few things that when you get onto it, you won't then get off. You won't then suddenly start producing inaccessible code once you know how to do it in an accessible way. So that's why I get ridiculously enthusiastic about it, because it is something that you can see change. You can, and if obviously an agency knows how to do it properly, once they've learned, that means everything they do will be better, and then you have a compounding effect, I suppose. I used to argue for or put the case for accessibility for 15 years, and I would just come of it mostly from a business point of view. Like you said about the 2 in 10 going past your shop because they can't physically get in. If people can't come to your website and spend money with you, they're going to go elsewhere. So that's why the people who are more proactive now will get better results. The only problem is, as you mentioned earlier, about data and metrics and how you can prove the case. You can't prove the case. It's one of those things that you just have to go. Logic says if this website meets the needs of more people will stay on it, and they will spend money or become your customer. It's so absurdly simple, but you would think it was the most impossible thing to solve when you're trying to explain it, unless you can do it via examples. And that's why anything that will get people on board in terms of just understanding a bit more and seeing it, and they go, yeah, I get it now.
Yeah, seeing it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I like that analogy, that it's a one-way road, because then you just notice it everywhere, and you're not going to do something that makes something inaccessible. We're at 3:45. What we'll do is just take another couple of questions. If anyone has questions for the panel, I do have one here in the Q&A. And then what we can do is just take like a 10-minute break, I suppose. There's people that are here since 2 p.m. So if you're joining for the rest of the talks, and I really recommend you do, so we can take a few minute break to grab tea, coffee, do things like that. So we have a question here about from Robert. Are there any tools that would be recommended for using, say, a screen reader, so you can test your website for how accessible it is, or inclusive, or is inclusive user testing the better way to test it? So can you do it yourself, or get users to do it? Clive, I suppose this is what your agency does.
Well, it's a great question. The first thing I would say is there is a free screen reader, NVDA, which anybody can download and use, and I use it myself as part of my work. But the thing is, my own disabilities from the accident are more cognitive. They don't affect my ability to use a keyboard, to use a mouse, to be able to view a computer screen. So no matter how proficient I might get or think I get with using a screen reader, it's not the same as actually being blind and having to use it. And so I would say that the answer is both. It's always best if you can get disabled people involved from the beginning, because as Craig's explained earlier, and you both explained really well earlier, that if you get the fundamentals right, it becomes easier. But the other thing I would say is that because it can be an overwhelming thing, and sometimes people want a fully accessible website, that's a unicorn. That doesn't work. That unfortunately, I wish it was, but it's not, because even amongst disabled people, you have people with different disabilities that sometimes have needs that contradict each other in terms of the digital space. So therefore, what I always say is that's a myth, but that doesn't stop us working towards it. And therefore, once you realize that you're not going to get perfection, but you're going to get everything you do will be a little bit more on the journey, then that's the approach that I take. So it's very much about a pragmatic approach. So downloading a screen reader, working out how to use it, I guess that's going to give you more insights than you would get from using an automated testing tool. But even using an automated testing tool, I guess, is a step further than not using anything at all. So I would just encourage everybody just to start, because it is a journey that we're all on. And if you can make that start today in whatever way, then I think you're on the way. The only thing I would add is that you haven't got people using screen readers. You've got people using with hand disabilities. You've got people who are neurodivergent. You've got people who see or use websites in so many different ways. The more people you can get involved, the better. And as long as you're making that step towards wanting to be as inclusive as possible. And to be honest, inclusivity is such a watchword with so many corporations, and yet their websites they scream anything but inclusivity. Once you make that bridge, that connection between, and maybe we just need to reach out to more people who work within EDI within the large corporations as well, because it kind of all works together.
But
sorry, that's going slightly off.
No, but maybe they're siloed, sometimes. And yeah, I was just going to mention, somebody said there, there's a few mentions about VoiceOver and Mac, and then Dominic wants to recruit people with accessibility need for testing. And somebody just shared Fable. So Fable, provide testers. Fable also just raised 25 million in a Series A round this week as well. But you can connect with us also on Leaders for Accessibility. We can reach out to people. Clive, Access by Design. And so Craig, I'll leave the final point to you, and just if you were able to give your local GP and doctor's surgery advice on how to make the process of booking an appointment easier for you, what things do they need to think about, or what else can they provide?
I think number one would just be asking you, I guess just generally asking people who are registered with the surgery, how should they communicate with you, and how is best for you to communicate with them. I think one of the largest problems and what we have within accessibility compliance is that people who aren't accessible feel like they can't ask people who are disabled for their experience. So we end up getting people making informed and not bad intentioned decisions, but they are decisions for a disabled person, not made by a disabled person, if that makes sense, in terms of we are trying to make decisions on behalf of people. And I think by bringing lived experience into the room, and maybe even having a focus group and just going, what works for us right now? Could we hold back a reserved number of appointments just for people with disabilities and provide them additional time to be able to book, or give them a quiet hour to be able to phone that is reserved just for them, type thing. I think making tiny little adjustments right now that don't cost a lot of money and don't have a large kind of impact on existing processes can just make it more inclusive, and then we can work together on how we solve the larger problems on things.
Absolutely. I think that is such great advice there, is just ask people. And there is the saying or a phrase is nothing about us without us, really. And that fear, maybe we just have to get rid of that fear and just say, hey, how can we make this better for you? Or when you're registering with a company, how would you like us to communicate with you? Of course, it takes the mindset shift. It takes a lot of things on that organization, but it just starts with asking questions. And so on that, there's, you can find Clive, Access by Design, there in the chat. Craig, we shared his LinkedIn, and also then Different Breed event ticketing. If you work for a larger organization or even a smaller one, events and ticketing is something that you do, then do get in touch with Craig and Different Breed. So look, thanks guys both for taking the time out of your day to join us.